Hello and welcome to another Album of Record podcast. I'm Craig Lyndall, joined as always by Andrew. How's it going, Andrew?
I was telling you beforehand I was kind of a crappy day, but I'm excited because we have a awesome guest here to talk to who I'm excited to talk to about a pretty cool experience. And so I'm excited to get into that. But before we turn it over to our guest, we had Dan Parker on a few months ago, also a fellow friend of ours who our guest Scott also knows. And we kicked off our new metal poetry segment when Dan was on the show. And so I don't have a series of poetry to start here, but I do have some 90s music poetry.
Okay.
So I'm going to read this one, and I know it's one that Craig especially is going to appreciate. There we go. Anyone can see the road that they walk on is paved in gold. And it's always summer. They'll never get cold. They'll never get hungry. They'll never get old and gray. You can see their shadows wandering off somewhere. They won't make it home, but they really don't care. They wanted the highway. They're happier there today. Today. Got it?
I actually don't.
You don't got this one.
I feel silly. Maybe it's the poetry angle. Scott, you have
How
it?
about... Yeah.
I have no idea.
All right, I'll give you, that was the chorus. What if I give you the line before the chorus?
Let's see.
They started walking. Where were they going without ever knowing the way?
Is it fastball?
Fastball.
It's Fastball the Way. One of
Boy,
Craig's
do I
favorite
hate
songs.
fastball. Oh. Of all the songs, man, that's the one that I always ban whenever I can on any 90s playlist. I bet I have fastball blocked on Spotify somewhere.
So I know it's not the topic of this show, but I did have the chance to go to the Rock Hall inductions this year, and I thought of Craig throughout the entire show because one Jimmy Buffett was inducted this year, and so I think we could probably loop Fastball in whenever they get the nod 40 years from now.
I'm surprised Craig wasn't there picketing in protest. There's no place for
funny.
Buffett in the Rock Hall. But no,
Right,
I think it's funny though. Like the thing I like about these poetry segments is it really highlights how bad some of these lyrics are. He just really puts the cherry on top. You don't always realize it in the melody of the song and in the flow of the song, but when you really isolate it, it's some really trite lyrics out there.
I did want to start snapping while you were doing that really quick and really add some credence to it. So I appreciate it.
I need to turn it into Def Jam poetry is what needs to happen.
There we go.
So yeah, Andrew and I have talked about this a few times on the podcast. We used to write about sports a lot, and Dan Parker was part of that sports website. So is our guest, Scott Sargent, who comes to us not to talk about sports today, but Taylor Swift, which is really funny. Of all the guests that we could have picked to talk about Taylor Swift, this is three people who probably shouldn't be talking about Taylor Swift, but here we are. How's it going, Scott?
Good. I appreciate the SEO that all this is going to bring because given the last year or so that Ms. Swift has had, like you said, the three of us, I would have never guessed at any point the three of us would be getting together to talk about this kind of stuff. So I'm glad to be here. I cannot say enough about what you guys have been putting together here with this Album of Record podcast. I have been a fan from afar, though not very far, if that makes sense. I'm just very proud of everything, and the passion that the two of you bring for all of this is fantastic. So I hope I don't bring that down too much.
Absolutely, you will not. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
That. So the reason why we're talking is that you made a decision with your significant other to go overseas to see Taylor Swift instead of seeing her here in the United States. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how that trip came to be?
I think decision is doing a lot of work there on that, but it was a won't put her on blast, but it was a significant birthday, and the idea was to go see her somewhere. Somewhere in my mind was maybe Miami because it's in the fall and it's warm. Maybe New Orleans because it's a fun city and it's walkable and it's easy to get around, or maybe Indy because it's 5 hours away from where I live, and the ended up going the complete opposite direction. A lot of that was cost related, which is crazy to think about. That a trip to London, England, plus Airbnb, plus tickets, plus everything else that goes with it, um, could be less expensive than a trip to Miami for the same show. But just given supply and demand, and probably Europe's reluctance to spend that kind of money on concert tickets, led us to go there. And I am not a huge traveler. I enjoy traveling, but I also enjoy, the life I have, domestically. And it's never one of those things where I'm like, man, I have to go there. I've never regretted a trip, but it's just not something that I actively seek out. So the concept of doing a weekend in London, which, right? I mean, just in general, I mean, the the text group, the group chat we had for the trip was called Cincy Trip, because when this was all planned, I'm like, we're treating this like it's a trip to Cincinnati, and I think that's insane. But it ended up being a quick in and out that allowed us to go to Wembley Stadium, which is kind of wild, and see inarguably the biggest pop performer of this generation. And I use this generation loosely because it is a generation that there were people in their 60s and 70s at the show, and there were kids in their teens and younger at the show. And it is so, when you talk about generational talent, I don't quite know where you pen that because of how omnipresent she is with all of the different generations. But it was a remarkable experience. I could probably name half a dozen songs that we heard, but it was just one of those situations that um, it I again didn't regret the trip, and it was just a captivating show, just given the level of performance that she puts on for 3-ish hours.
So
So
is
go ahead,
is
Andrew.
your significant other a big Swiftie in general, or was this sort of just like because of how omnipresent Taylor is, that it was an idea that like it's just something we need to go see and do?
I don't know how you would rank Swifties.
There is
In
an official ranking.
my guess is if there was you know a a way to sort of categorize that, it would probably be top 1%. The level of fandom that her and some of her friends have is, I wish I cared about anything as much as she does, Taylor Swift. Um, and, but it's awesome because it's the things like her changing notes when she sings a certain song is picked up on. Like my my level of fandom from a live show realm comes from sort of the Dave Matthews fold, right? Where the fact that, and just like you guys with Pearl Jam, right? Every show's different. Any show you go to, it's never the same as you saw the last time. And for someone like Taylor to largely have the same set list and add one or two songs, which are, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but
Yeah.
they're called surprise songs, and they always come in the same time in the set list. And at any point when, like, kind of logarithmically, and when you kind of figure out where in the night that she is in her set list, hundreds of thousands of people flock to TikTok or Instagram live streams to see what those songs are in that moment. Like,
Yeah.
which is remarkable to me. And so Andrew, to answer your question, like, it is top tier. And a lot of this whole trip was for that, obviously, given the birthday. But it was still cool to really be a part of, just given sort of the mythology around all of it, which is kind of crazy to think about, especially given as you mentioned earlier, the sports overlap of some of our writing. And obviously now there's a Taylor Swift overlap with sports.
Yeah.
Not all of it positive. I was there in a Jason Kelsey jersey, which
Solid.
so a little bit of a curveball on the whole Kelsey thing, but it was a very popular choice among people who were there. We can get into the whole sort of issue. We were about maybe 15 feet from her parents, and the jersey was a big hit with the two of them, and so the whole thing again was just crazy to be again in Wembley for a show that I did not expect to be a part of. If you would have asked me 4 months ago if this was happening, I would have told you no chance.
So I happen to be wearing my Pearl Jam Boston t-shirt today, but one of the things that Andrew and I talked about after my long trip and 2 shows in Boston was that the entire time I was there, you couldn't walk 5 feet without seeing a Pearl Jam bro. So like, was London essentially, did it feel like a Taylor Swift convention the entire time you were there?
So are you guys familiar with the whole bracelet thing?
Yes.
But why don't you tell everybody, just in case somebody out there is not?
So there is a song that Taylor wrote, and in a one sort of passing line in it, she says, "Make the friendship bracelets." And after that, bracelet creation and trading became a huge thing among Taylor Swifties, if you want to call it that. So almost as a telltale, when you're walking around these cities, are the bracelets, right? Some of them innocently, maybe 3 or 4. Some of them halfway up the arms, depending upon how intense it is. But the whole thing is they trade them too, right? So like, you come with an armful of bracelets and then you see other people with them and you trade them, and some of them are lyrics, some of them are just song titles, what have you. So that was really the way to tell who was there, to kind of see the show.
Or if you're a professional athlete, it might be your phone number.
There you go. There you go.
That one worked out pretty well for him.
So, there was a good amount, obviously there's a significant amount of people there from England who were there to see the show. There was a significant amount of Americans there for that weekend, depending upon, again, I said we were there Friday. My guess is Saturday was probably a little more attended from an American standpoint, but yeah, I mean, you could tell, especially depending upon the hour and where you were, who was there for the shows, and who was there just based on, being an Englander.
Andrew?
Well, I wanted to touch on one thing you talked about that I think is interesting. Like, it's not specific to this show, but I think something that's cool about, like, you mentioned Taylor being generational, and it's cool because, like, I have 19 and 15-year-old nieces who are just huge Swifties. Was it 2 years ago or last year for Christmas? I think it was 2 years ago for Christmas. My brother and his wife got them tickets to Taylor Swift in Cincinnati. And, I mean, just seeing the emotion they had in getting those tickets was incredible. And I think it's cool that, like, you go as young as girls, 7, 8 years old are huge Swifties, into the teenagers, into the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, like truly a phenomenon in pop culture that I personally don't think we've seen probably since Michael Jackson. And, even Michael Jackson, like for our age, even like by the time we were really getting into formative years, he was really past his peak sort of power and influence. And, he obviously had some scandals, shall we say, that might have impacted that as well. But so I'm just I think it's cool that, like, obviously going to see a show in Wembley in and of itself is just a cool experience. But the fact that you're seeing this just absolute, I mean, there is no bigger star, I don't think, in pop culture in the world than Taylor Swift. And so I just wonder, like, when you go, like, is there any sense of that? Just the sheer size of what it is you're witnessing and the influence that has. I mean, you talked about the hundreds of thousands of people flocking to TikTok just to see what song she's going to play, but just in general, the grand scheme of things, I mean, can you really feel that weight when you go to that show?
There's a gravity around everything that entire time, especially when you get around the stadium. because once you get within a certain distance of Wembley, or any stadium that she's going to be at, I think it's everybody there is there for that, right? And I admittedly kind of slept on it a little bit. When she was domestic last year, and the shows, they obviously a bit of a touchy point, but she skipped our hometown, right? But went to several cities surrounding it. And the idea, like, you had to sign up for these tickets and you didn't know what show you're going to get, and you may get to go with people, or you may, like, I'm like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then it sounds crazy, but then I saw it on Disney Plus, and it is like, I don't know if we could swear on this, and please bleep it if not, but
Absolutely.
it was like, holy shit, like, this is a significant moment in time, from a music standpoint, from a pop culture standpoint, from whatever you want to call it. And I know you guys talked about this in a previous episode of the show, but for that Disney Plus airing to be a cut down version of the tour,
Yeah.
and still be all of 3 hours, without breaks. The only break she had was when she changed outfits for the different eras and everything, and
Yep.
it was like, man. And so that era of the, no pun intended, of the tour, my mother, who's going to be 70 next year, and my sisters, who are both younger than me, went to that show. I have two daughters. They are now 13 and 11, and their first concert pre-pandemic was a Taylor Swift show. And to think mine was like, Beach Boys in Chicago is not a bad first concert, right? Like,
No, not at all.
there are some really embarrassing concerts that people can go to, and for a twin billing of Beach Boys in Chicago at Blossom is not terrible. But for their first concert to be someone who is not only still popular, but arguably more so now than she was back in 2018, I think Reputation tour was,
Yeah.
is remarkable. And yeah, so I mean, even though while you're belting out these songs, which I had to learn in like 3 weeks, you just recognize how big of a deal this is. And she has said that this is it. Like, once Indy happens, like, this tour is done. And you have to give her credit, because she could she could go to Vegas tomorrow and do a residency and make everybody come to her for the rest of her life and make
Yeah.
money hand over fist. And she is just like, you know what? That's it. Like, it's going to be an end of a moment. And, and I think Swifties, again, this is kind of a silly term, but everybody is going to be waiting for what's next for her. And you could argue, given age and career arc and everything else, she may not even peaked yet. You know what I mean? Which
Yeah.
is kind of remarkable.
So one of the things that I've thought a lot about over the last couple of years that I used to not really give much credence to is the venue itself. But a year ago, I went to Red Rocks and was blown away by how the venue could actually impact my experience, how the venue itself felt like it had gravity. And maybe it's just, being a small club kid in Cleveland. Like, I love the Grog Shop. Don't get me wrong. I love all those
Right.
clubs, but I always just assumed that was me assigning some value to it as opposed to the venue carrying as much weight. And now that I've seen a band in Fenway as well, I'm starting to respect the venue a little bit more than maybe I used to. So I'm wondering, just Wembley itself and how that compared. You've been in lots of sports environments. You've been in a fair number of concert environments. Wembley itself, like, what was the gravity of walking into that place? And did you feel like it had any special impact?
100%. The fact that there's a stadium only built for the London national or the England national soccer team,
Yeah.
like, they're the only ones who actually play sports there, right? is pretty crazy. It's a 90,000 seat venue that is somehow easier to get in and out of than any venue locally. Like,
Yeah.
I can't, I still don't know. At no point, like, you've been in several, like you mentioned, several stadiums, several arenas, and then when they're like sold out events, you're like shoulder to shoulder and you're waiting in line forever, and like there, none of that, right? It was like there was again 90,000 people there, and it felt like it could have been 40. You would have not known that, but like you go into that, just the expanse of the stadium, and it was open air because it was a beautiful night. Um, and it just the amount of people, and all of them are there for the same reason. And everyone, it's just there's something about her that just brings genuine, I think, happiness and peace for people who may not exactly be at peace. When they go into that stadium or that arena, but for those 3 hours, they most certainly are. And there's just something about her. But to your point, Craig, have seen many concerts at many different venues, but that one it's gonna stick, because I mean I think just the mythology around Wembley, and obviously not the same Wembley as Queen played at and such, but just the whole idea around it, the size, the scope, and the fact that it was again a four night stint in London, but each one of them just seemed so unique in itself. And again, there was certainly a lot of I think the term used, gravity to the venue itself. Is just I'll probably never be back there. But that said, I wouldn't turn it down if offered the chance.
So between the price somehow magically being cheaper, the venue being a better experience, I'm serious, man. You're seriously talking me into seeing this Oasis reunion in London. I got to figure out how to make this happen.
If I'm telling you, man, if the price makes sense, I don't know what Oasis tickets are going to go for locally. I recommend it, because it's
Yeah.
especially if you turn it around quick enough where the jet lag's not a thing.
Yeah.
I show Friday, Richmond Saturday, back, home Sunday was the trip, and it's back to work on Monday. So there was not much in the way of issues there. I mean, financially and from a venue standpoint, if you could make it happen, I couldn't recommend it enough.
A true Cincinnati show.
There you go.
I do kind of want to talk. Well, actually, let me back up. Going back to that, it does make me wonder, like, is there's probably, like, I assume Taylor Swift has to be more popular than Oasis in London, but it's probably closer than we might think. I think that, like, England is like the one place in the world where it's possible that Oasis could have close to the same draw that Taylor Swift
completely different
does.
Audience, totally different demographic.
Definitely, for sure. But I did want to circle back and talk a little bit about the set list in general. In talking about it, we talked about, or you mentioned, how Dave and Pearl Jam, they will play totally unique shows all the time, and I always think that's pretty cool. But there's, you have to be fair to a pop artist when you have all that choreography and the production values of a show. It's frankly impossible to just do it on a whim and make up a set list every night. But I wondered if you would maybe talk a little bit about the structure of this set list, because I do think that this is something interesting that she's doing. Like, and I'll let you expand on this a little bit further, but this idea of taking and packaging this show that represents an entire career arc, and especially a career arc as interesting as hers, I think it's a really fascinating way to do it. And I do think that it gives sort of a little bit of a more artistic integrity, I think, to a pop show than what you might traditionally otherwise have.
Yeah. So are you guys familiar with kind of how it all came to be?
A little bit.
Yeah. So, obviously, I mean, the two of you are very much aware of my feelings around sort of the whole pandemic and stuff, and sort of the making the most out of the situation. And clearly she was one of the most prolific examples of that, right? And in releasing 2 albums over the course of the pandemic, and the
2 of my favorite albums, by the way. I wouldn't consider myself a
they're
Swiftie, but they're the indie rock records. I kind of dig
yeah,
it.
same. No, I know. And there's, I recall when Folklore was released, our friend Jeff Namina said like, "Where are the hits?" Right? And because it wasn't Shake It Off, right? It
Right.
was more indie folk, and Folklore and Evermore, I think, for a lot of sort of deep cut Swifties, those are the albums, right? That people, but she didn't get to do tours for those, right? Which previously every album had its own tour.
That one also had a Disney Plus special, but no tour.
Right. And so she didn't get to do tours for those albums. So the idea was, okay, I'm also rewriting all my albums in the wake of the Scooter Braun stuff, and kind of put this whole thing together. And the tour prior to Tortured Poets was different from post Tortured Poets. She removed a couple songs, added some Tortured Poets eras and stuff like that. But yeah, the idea that an entire career is just sort of, and it wasn't chronological. There was sort of a, for Ted Lasso fans, kind of a dark forest period in the show too, right? Like Lover stuff, which is all poppy and great and happy, kind of gave way into the darkness of Reputation, which then gave way to sort of the Folklore Evermore stuff, and then finished with like the Midnight stuff and Karma and everything that kind of goes with that. It is just, I mean, terrific. I think choreography is probably not even the term, just production in general. I can't even imagine the amount of time and effort that went into sanding all the edges that were a part of that. And I remember our writing days and how much I would stew over comma placement.
Right.
And just to do that at such a grand scale, I couldn't imagine putting all that together, making it happen as efficiently and effectively as she does on a nightly basis.
So that was one of the things that I noticed about the set list too, is like I don't know if this is controversial or just commonly thought amongst Swifties, but I kind of figure 1989 is like one of the biggest periods, and the guts or the balls to put that kind of more middle of the show and not save any of that for the end. Like, how did that feel live?
So agreed. And I also, Red was a huge album when it was out too,
It was.
right? And there was a world where Lover's kind of if you're looking at the entire arc, obviously a tail end kind of things, but also to the gravity of the show. Like if you look at her top stream song on Spotify right now, it's Cruel Summer with like 2 point something billion streams, because it's like the obviously Miss Americana is the first song that she opens with, but like Cruel Summer is like the first song that she opens with on this tour, and it's the belting of the bridge and everything that kind of goes with it. And so for that album to have been years ago and that song to be the number one stream, it's back on the radio and everything else, it's just wild that happened. But it again, it's hard. Everything she decides seems to work really well.
Yeah.
And for 89 and Red and some of these other sort of what we would have considered sort of prime Taylor albums to sort of take a back seat to some of this stuff. Just like when, you go to a Dave or Pearl Jam show and he plays the new stuff and it's like, man, play the hits. Like, we want to hear ants marching. We don't want to hear whatever that,
Yeah.
But eventually whatever that new song is that he's playing now, like 5 years later, it's like, man, that's a jam, right? Like, and,
Right. Yeah.
and that's just ended. That's just what she has figured out masterfully. And the whole idea behind the surprise songs is again, it's a whole wrinkle that I would have never imagined was be as big as it is. But to purposefully omit certain songs from an era and then bring it back just for one night and that's it is, again, if you weren't there, like I was there Friday in Wembley Ed Sheeran was there as a guest on Thursday,
Oh,
and that is pretty freaking cool, right?
yeah.
And they have a couple duets that they sang, and they did a thing, and they kind of toasted through it, and that was cool. And that's it. That'll never happen again. We had Florence and the Machine, which or
Yeah.
no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't Florence. It was there was. I'm trying to think of who opened. Um, I'm gonna mess it up, and I'm gonna get yelled at for it. But either way, it was again everything was, even though they're the same songs, so unique in their own right. And I would not have picked some of the songs that get omitted to be omitted, but she made it work.
I think that's something that's really interesting about her is, too, there's like an intentionality to everything she does that I think some people can view, if you want to be cynical about it, they view it as all being sort of contrived. But like, what I think is cool is like she has built this entire mythology. Like there is an entire, beyond her just making records and playing live, like there is an entire expanded universe. This is the Marvel universe. There is a Taylor Swift universe, and there's this world where people dive into every single word she says, what she wears in public. People are trying to figure out, is she dropping a hint for something? And to your point, like even the things she chooses to omit and what song she plays in what city, it's not a thing that's done on accident. And again, if you want to be cynical and call it contrived, you can, but I actually view it as like this really cool thing. Like something I've always loved about Pearl Jam is, like, in a similar way, when Pearl Jam was the biggest band in the world, they were notoriously reclusive with the media, but they had built like this mystique and this whole mythology of Pearl Jam. Like people talk about like the story of Pearl Jam becoming almost in like a biblical sense. Like it's like this, there's like a genesis to it. Like, Green River and Mother Love Bone, and then Andrew Wood's death, and then, bringing in Ed, who famously wrote the lyrics to Alive Once and Footsteps While Surfing, and he sent them in, like all these stories that we know. And I always just appreciate that about artists, that, I just think there's something cool about building a whole mystique around your whole, like it sort of makes a community, like where everybody wants to be involved. The fans want to be involved and be a part of that universe.
I struggle to feel how being intentional about something is bad,
Yes, thank
because
you.
to me it shows you care, and that your fans are going to appreciate the level of care you put into it. I think cynics, to your point, Andrew, are going to call it contrived.
Mm-hmm.
And is there an element of, is a little bit overblown? Maybe, but if you don't care what choker she's wearing, that's fine. Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You don't. But there are people who do, and she's doing that for those people, right? And for whether it's sports, whether it's music, whether it's politics, for someone you care about to care as much about that craft as you do, that's not common, right? Like
Right.
there are so many people that are either into it for the money or for the show or for the celebrity or whatever, and maybe there's an element of that in some of the stuff, but at the
Mm-hmm.
root of it, I think, is just intentionality and care. And I mean, if the biggest criticism you can make of someone is they care too much, then great, right? Like, I mean, I
Right.
think we would all want any act or any team or any politician we support to care as much as we do, and she undoubtedly does.
So it's interesting that you put it that way, because one of the things that, you were lucky enough to do when you were really embroiled in the sports thing was you were really close to the LeBron James Haley Comet, and you covered him like a
Mm-hmm.
crazy person. You got to ask him questions and scrums and whatever else. But a lot of the parallels there is like he's his own historian, and she feels like
Mm-hmm.
she's her own historian, where she knows all the details just as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
did that occur to you? Am I just making that up?
No, I almost mentioned it in this exact conversation. I didn't know if we were going to bridge that gap or not. because he is the king of intentionality.
Well, first of all, tell everybody like your history of covering the Cavs in the LeBron era.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I just didn't know how much the fourth wall we're touching.
Let's knock it down.
I, I I had the honor of
You did cool shit. Let's tell everybody.
Yeah.
Of covering LeBron in the 2009-2010 season. Then I got to cover Mo Williams and Kyrie and whomever for a couple of years where things were really bad, CJ Miles and the like. And then obviously when LeBron came back to Cleveland and the run they had there, up until when he left for LA, I was boots on the ground for a lot of that stuff. And to your point, I think Haley's Common is a great way to put it. Can't see it next to me, but I have a bunch of obviously the Cavs championship stuff here in my office. But you know, what I remember talking to others, Brian Windhorst and the like, about him is everything he does is with intention. Everything he says, and even his non-comments are intentional. And there's a lot of similarities there, both in the way of generational gravity within their craft, as much as the multi-generational fandom that they have, as well as the people the vocal minority who claim to not appreciate them, who I think in the back of their mind will eventually. It's when they're all done is when you kind of come to terms with the fact that, man, I probably should have appreciated this a little bit more. And I think in a way, covering LeBron probably helped me appreciate the Taylor stuff a little bit more than I probably would have heading into it. But yeah, Craig, I think you hit it on the head. Very, very substantial parallels between the two, both in the way of their place in their respective worlds and how neither of them seem to really care about all the noise outside, and they just want to do what is best for their fans. And do they each have their missteps? Sure. Does LeBron do or say stuff that we're like, oh man, you might maybe want that one back? But I think you, Craig, you have defined LeBron as kind of impenetrable in times and
unimpeachable.
You know, unimpeachable. That's the term. Yeah, and I think Taylor is the same way. Does she make CBS put her on TV when she's at those games? No. Like, is she going to stop going because, some bro on Twitter is complaining about it? 100% not. And I appreciate that in both of those individuals.
We probably should have touched on this a little bit more when we introduced Scott in this episode, but I will mention, we'll get back to Taylor in a second, but I want to say a few things about Scott for a second, because we started this website, Waiting for Next Year, which covered Cleveland sports in 2007. Is that correct? I think 2007.
Yeah, and it was when the Indians had just gotten bounced from the playoffs. The Browns had a 10-7 season.
That's right.
Or 10-6
season.
10-6. And the Cavaliers had just gotten to the NBA Finals against the San Antonio Spurs.
And we were ready to cover the just heyday of Cleveland sports, the golden era, the golden era,
the unimaginable amount of success that would come our way.
Right? I don't remember what happened next. I think it was all up and up after that.
Yeah, for sure. We ended up covering the Manny Acta era of the Indians. The Browns completely fell apart after that one season. Derek Anderson was gone like the next year.
In both Mike Brown eras of the Cavaliers.
In both Mike Brown eras, yeah. But seriously, like, people, a lot of our listeners may be music people and not familiar with, a lot of the sports, but especially locally here in Cleveland, what Scott accomplished in terms of, really getting in close to the Cavs. There was an era in which everybody kind of abandoned the Cavs after LeBron left. And I think one of the cool things that you did, Scott, was you really saw that as an opportunity and you just grabbed it and ran with it. And for a very long period there, you were an essential follow on Twitter. If you wanted to know the Cavs, you were an essential person to read. You were delivering news. You were, really getting us inside of what was going on with that team. And I was always super proud to work with you on that website and to see you really blossom in that role. So,
No, I
just
appreciate that.
shower some praise on you there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's a Game of Thrones line where they say within chaos is a ladder. And, I think about that a lot personally and professionally. And look back at, I just did it then because who is giving me a credential? And if you're going to give me a credential to be at the practice courts, if I'm one of two people there, I'm one of two people there. But that run, and again, not to make this segment about me, really galvanized a lot of my traits that I think I live out today, both as a father, partner, a coworker. There's a lot of stuff that I learned over those years, and I got to see some pretty cool stuff while all that was going on. So no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's jump back to the trip a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think we've covered the Taylor aspect and the concert aspect. So how about the London aspect? Like, in terms of, I know you were there for a show and everything else, but I mean, you found yourself in London. What was all that like? And because you said you're not much of a world traveler, and I like you, I don't really care that much about traveling. And so my wife, in an effort to get me to Europe, is always looking for festivals that I might want to go, music festivals that I might want to go to in order to con me into a trip. And actually now she's thinking like football, soccer matches would get the job done as well. But talk a little bit about London and kind of what that meant, even in a short amount of time that you were visiting.
Yeah, so I will say a part of the sales pitch.
And can you believe I just did a talk about? I just did a talk about it. That's not even a question.
Tell me about.
Cone of shame.
You should be in Berea. So part of the sales pitch was, hey, we're going to do this, but also we want to go to Richmond to see all of the Ted Lasso stuff. And not to make this a Ted Lasso podcast, but everything that they filmed in and or around the park, the benches with the phone booths, the restaurant / bar, all of that is like legit stuff. And to be able to go and have fish and Guinness at that picnic table that they sat at when filming that show was like, you know what, I'm in, right? So that part was really cool to be in Richmond, which is a really cool town. Saw a portion of what I think was a cricket match, and I don't know who was winning at any point, but there were a lot of people that were really excited about it. We did consider trying to find a soccer match of some sort or a football match for those overseas. I don't know where your listenership's coming from these days, but
we are worldwide, baby.
I want to make sure we're sensitive to that, and we didn't make that happen. But no, London it's a cool town insofar as you will have a 17th century building next to a glass skyscraper, and like there is a poetry, I think, about the city, but it's still one that's trying to become more modern over time as well. So we did all the went to Big Ben. It's all the touristy stuff and Tower of London, and they have Uber boats, which along the Thames, which for those who don't know, the gigantic river that stretches across London. Uber has purchased boats that you just go to stops and you kind of clock in and clock out, and they charge you based on almost like we would do on a toll booth domestically. So that was pretty cool. The one thing that really surprised me is the amount of cycling that goes on over there. Like I know we try locally to have like cycling lanes and things like that. It is, I'm not exaggerating, probably a 40-60 split between cycling and actual automotive traffic when you're going from place to place. People and it's not just exercise. That's like how they're getting to work, to a pub, to go visit people, whatever they're doing. The amount of people on bicycles is a pretty remarkable thing for them to kind of have that infrastructure locally. I gather we're trying to do that in certain larger cities domestically and are struggling a little bit with it. But New York tries, but I mean their traffic
Yeah.
issues are insurmountable in some situations. But
Do they bike on the left side of the road?
Yes, yeah, everything,
Yeah.
yeah. So obviously there's the whole left right different steering columns on the other sides and that whole thing. But yeah, no, everything is, yeah, they bike on the left and they are, I mean, quickly, like there is no, no concern, which leads me to believe that it's something that they're just very comfortable doing on a day-to-day basis, which is pretty sweet. And when you have a city like London, which again, there's like 8 million people who live in London, which is no different than New York City. And they get around much easier than
Yeah.
anybody does in New York City. The whole train thing is kind of confusing. You really have to be paying attention to where you are and what line you're on and things like that. But and they're all named weird, like everything is Saint this or that or whatever, and you got to really be listening. But otherwise, yeah, those were the things that really jumped out to me about London. It's a cool town. Would go back. Very clean. No, it's for 8 million people, and to not have garbage on the side of the streets and stuff like that is pretty cool. And again, the way they get around is much different than we do domestically.
So there's a lot of negative things about getting older, but one of the cool things about getting older is not caring about being cool. When I went to college in Boston, and I'd never done a lot of the never done a lot of the touristy kind of things, but when we were there, we found the Goodwill Hunting bench in the public gardens, and we went to Cheers and all that kind of stuff. So like, now that we're far too old to be cool, like you can kind of take in a city in a different kind of a way.
Yeah, I will tell you, Richmond, there were, again, from a generational standpoint, there were teenagers and there were people our parents' age. And just, there to just kind of take it all in, which is really cool, and you do the things and you get the biscuits and all the stuff that's kind of a part of the Ted Lasso lore from a touristy standpoint, but at no point did anybody like was it a hey, this isn't a cool thing to do standpoint. And which again appreciate that. I think a lot of that speaks more to some of the immaturity of us being younger and caring about what we think other people are thinking when in fact they don't give a shit about what we're doing.
No.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a carefree nature to maturity, which I certainly appreciate.
I think I am certainly like you. I'm a bit of a homebody. I've never been to Europe. So I perhaps don't have a great grasp of this, but one thing I do know is that we, as Americans, a very long time ago, our country decided on an isolationist policy. And I think in many ways served us well, but it also sort of shielded us as generations came and went. It really shielded us from the idea of the history of Europe and how much older Europe actually is than America. Like, we think 200 years is ancient. Like 200 years seems so long to us. But for England, 200 years is a blip on the radar when they have thousands of years of history. So I was just kind of curious. You touched on it a little bit in the sort of balancing of, the modernization versus, some of the old buildings. But I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little bit about, there we go, talk about. How did you feel about the history and the sort of seeing things that are like truly old compared to what we might think of as old?
Yeah, so you're right. You're walking through hallways or in some cases tombs, where like these are like 1700, 1600. Like it's remarkable that some of this stuff is still standing. We can't make a refrigerator here that lasts more than 10 years.
Yeah.
And these buildings were created so long ago. I will say sort of the eighth grader Washington DC trip kind of snuck in on me a little bit because after a while it's like, okay, like another dead person. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure they were important, but so there is a little bit of that to it, but they do kind of guided tours. You could get headsets and like it knows where you are as you're going through and it'll tell you why it's important. Shout out to technology, for that kind of stuff. And for folks who are really into that, like couldn't recommend it more. To kind of do the audio guided tours. This way you can kind of do it at your own pace and you don't have to try and listen to some guy shouting at you with a flag. But
walking backwards.
Yeah, right. Cracking a joke every once in a while just to see who's listening. So that kind of stuff was cool. I know again enough to be dangerous about like Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and all the stuff that kind of went, all that. But but to see it kind of like, we're walking across a moat. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like what we're walking across was literally to keep people from invading this castle, however many hundreds of years ago. I mean, some of that's pretty cool. The ravens which are a very real thing, are all over there. And, so, but again, then you walk across and you're on the rooftop of a glass office building having a espresso martini saying like, oh, hey, that looks, that's cool. Like, so there's, I hesitate to call it gentrification, but it is certainly a way to, where they're able to, they are building up, a lot of that area. It's, I think I referred to it kind of like Nashville-y almost, like where they're just throwing up skyscrapers all over. They're doing the same thing in London. It just happens to be across from Big Ben and some of these other very historic monuments that, have been there and will be there for hundreds more years.
Yeah, cool. Well, man, this was really fun. I don't really have much else. An unbelievable walk. Who would have thought that the three of us would be getting together to talk about Taylor Swift and trip to London? A little bit better in hindsight than trip to Cincinnati or Indianapolis. I love Indianapolis. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, so I will say you didn't ask, but I did wear bracelets. But mine were, one was Mustard on That Beat Ho from They Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, and the other one said It Was All a Dream from Notorious B.I.G.'s Juicy. So
sticking true to your brand.
I had the bracelets on. I did not trade any of them, but I wanted to have something on. I will say, so the one thing really cool, and we mentioned Taylor's parents earlier in the conversation. Her dad filmed probably 2/3 of the show with his cell phone in his seat.
Well, I mean, he had to because there weren't any other cameras in the arena.
Yeah. So how many times has he seen her perform? Right. Yeah. And to your point, it's like people taking pictures
like
at a wedding
at an 8th grade chorus concert.
Yes. And they're. Even at a wedding, right, there are professional photographers and videographers there, and there's always that guy, the one uncle in the aisle with his Android, taking a picture as the bride's walking down the aisle, right? Like getting in the way of everybody. Like he filmed, and it was remarkable how intently he paid attention to what was inarguably like his 1,000th show that he has seen his daughter perform at. And that was amazing to me. Like that they were there, they were intently paying attention. They weren't on their phones or talking to the aunts and uncles or whatever. Like they didn't feel like they were there entertaining, like they were there to see it. And like that to me was one of the things that really jumped out as just to the core of what she's all about. And I think a lot of that comes from his name is Scott too. I learned
That's right.
When I was there, but as fabricated or built up or intentional as some of the stuff that she does, her parents were watching like it was the first time they've seen her perform, and I thought that was really genuine and really cool.
Yeah,
dude, you talk about unrelatable. Like she is completely unrelatable. You can't imagine being her. I can't imagine being her dad. Like, your kid just like blows up and becomes the next Michael Jackson without all the baggage.
Yeah, he's. It was funny. So a couple weeks ago, she was at the Chiefs game, and she was walking down the tunnel, and there was a lot of pictures of her, kind of, in her whatever outfit she was wearing. And if you look in the background, it's her dad struggling to get out of the golf cart that they both arrived in at the same time, and she was like 20 feet
Yeah.
ahead of him. Like he's like he's a lovable doofus, and just
I love
and
that.
but like just couldn't the amount of care I that he puts in. I mean, how many of our, Craig, how many soccer games for your kids have you been to? Or, Craig, or Andrew, how many times have you seen your nieces, doing, anything?
Yeah.
And like, and how many shows do you think he's been at? And again, he's sitting there the entire time in portrait mode, holding his phone, recording a show at
That's
Wembley
amazing.
Stadium.
That's
Yeah, like so
genuinely
that.
amazing.
Yeah, it was really
Like,
cool. I'll have to send you guys pictures. I took pictures of him recording the
oh, that's
show while I
awesome.
was there, which yeah.
Like, I think it just goes to show, though, like, so many things are relative to, Einstein's theory of relativity. And even in like the scope of, like, to us, we talked about how she's this just larger than life entity, and to him, that's just his daughter, and he's
His
just
daughter. You're right,
just a
100%.
proud dad recording his daughter. That's so
Yep.
cool. But I think it probably
Yeah.
also speaks pretty well to sort of, again, how she has managed to seem still grounded to whatever degree she can be grounded, relatable to whatever degree she can be relatable. That probably speaks well to where that came from.
Yeah, I think I don't think I'm going out on a limb to say her upbringing was probably, you mentioned Michael Jackson earlier as like a pop star of that, sort of that generation. I think probably a little bit different. In terms of, what she was afforded versus what Michael was afforded as a child. But, in the same, it could have ended up much differently.
Yeah.
And it hasn't. And I, I'd be shocked if it ever did. And she could not make another song. And we could get into this, a whole nother podcast about how I feel about, sort of the streaming nature of the 30 song albums and things like that, and how you kind of monetize and make the most of that. But
Yeah.
the fact that she could probably, if she decided like I'm done tomorrow, she could probably do it and still end up being one of the most successful, if not the most successful pop stars of all time.
Well, in 15 or 16 years, we'll come back and we'll talk about her offspring and like Bronny making the NBA. We'll figure out what stadium they're headlining. And
You say that like she won't still be the headliner.
Her offspring will be the opener.
I think
Paramore.
Scott's right. I think Scott's right. There's a chance she hasn't hit her peak yet. I think that's,
which is wild.
I think that's one of the most remarkable things about her is she has taken these extreme gambles. She could have easily just gone on and been the biggest country star ever, but then she puts out 1989 and like just revolutionizes pop music in a way. And, and then she could have just kept doing that. But, even
she makes a couple indie rock records with Bon Iver.
Yeah, I mean, and every step of the way, her fans have been along for the ride, and she just seems to get more and more popular. So I don't think that there's any indication that she's necessarily even hit a peak yet. We'll see what happens.
People always compare her to Madonna. Do you think she surpassed Madonna, Scott?
I think it'll be sacrilege for some of the, like our parents' generation to say it, but yeah, I think it's, the thing for me is this tour that, sort of the impetus for this podcast, right? Is so massive. And I don't know what the numbers are off the top of my head, but the biggest tour from a monetary standpoint in the history of concerts. As someone who personally tries to aspire to always be better the next day, right? For creatives, that gets even exponentially more so, right? We see countless stories of individuals who are actors or musicians or painters or what have you not be able to do better than the last thing, right? And then it oftentimes ends up tragically, right? What does she do from here? Is kind of what I'm going to be watching, and I'm not saying that as if that's a barometer for success. Like, there is undeniable success. Like I said, she could stop tomorrow, and it's like if LeBron could stop playing 5 years from now and he'd be in the Hall of Fame, right? Like, but he wants to continue to try and build on that legacy. Like, what's next for her, I think, is probably what I'm most curious about. Again, not a huge fan. Like, I appreciate and respect the hell out of everything she does. Where does it go from here once that Eras tour is done? My guess is she takes some time off, because this had to be an exhausting. You had a concert get canceled for terrorist activity. You had immense travel. You had, I mean, you name it. This tour has had it. What's the next act? And not defining success by that. Just very curious, by someone who is at the peak of their powers. What she can do from here is probably where I'm coming down on some of that.
And that's a perfect place to end. I appreciate you so much for joining us. This has been awesome for Andrew and me just to chat with you about anything, and of all things Taylor Swift.
We could do rock hall stuff next time. That was a great weekend too. But
I was at the Browns game on Sunday, and Foreigner played at halftime because they were there for the because of all the festivities. So I actually got to see Foreigner this weekend.
I won't spoil who we got to see sing Foreigner songs, because it was all done by others. We could save that for either offline or another show. But it was fun to be in Cleveland these last couple weeks, outside of the Sundays that you referenced in terms of the process. But no, I couldn't thank you enough for bringing me on. For listeners, the whole idea was kind of tongue in cheek when I referenced to Craig that, hey, if you ever have a Taylor Swift show, bring me on, because I am the last person you probably want talking about this kind of stuff. But if your listeners appreciate some inside jokes and some stories of yesteryear, I hope this one does well, and look forward to getting back together with you guys sometime soon.
Well, the title of the podcast is going to be Three Crusty Dudes Talk About Taylor Swift. So.
Perfect.
All right, with that, thanks so much, everybody, for watching on YouTube, for listening on the podcast. Do all the things that we need you to do to help this thing grow. And we'll talk to you next time. It's been the Album of Record podcast.